Hey there, detective listeners. If you're hungry for another great crime story, I want to tell you about a new true crime series from Investigation Discovery. It's a podcast, and I guarantee it will scratch your true crime itch. The show is called Stranglers, a new audio investigation into one of the world's most mysterious, unsolved cases, the Boston Strangler. 50 years ago, 13 women were brutally and randomly murdered. The crimes sparked one of the largest manhunts in Boston's history, and we still don't really know who did it. I'm Portland Helmick, the host of Stranglers. Each episode will explore the criminal record and reveal new details about these 13 gruesome deaths. We'll meet the victims, the original detectives, family members, and reporters who were closest to the Boston Strangler case. You'll even hear chilling recordings made by one killer whose jailhouse confession raised more questions than it answered. All right, here's a little preview of our first episode.
The following program includes descriptions of graphic and sexually explicit violence. This show may not be suitable for those affected by such descriptions or for young listeners. Parental discretion is advised.
This is New England.
Articles of silk or satin.
We were all afraid to let strangers come through the door.
500,000 fingerprints.
We started locking the doors.
Abnormal sexual tendency.
It was a manhunt of the century.
All we knew, somebody was killing people. It's the unknown that we fear.
If you really want to reach these people, you go to where they are, to the hometown.
Our hometown, Hyannis, Massachusetts, in the 60s was a quiet, little, peaceful village.
There were lots of green space and trees, and none of the big shopping centers and malls were there. Everyone knew everyone, and it was just a wonderful place to grow up. It was very safe and quiet and fun.
This was Mary Sullivan's hometown. It's about 70 miles from Boston. But even today, it's a world apart. A very small town on the edge of the Atlantic. Crime in the area is still rare, and back then people left their doors unlocked at night. Mary was born here in 1944, the third of 6 children in a blue-collar family.
My Aunt Mary Sullivan was the light of her Irish Catholic family. She grew up on Cape Cod, about a mile and a half from the Kennedy compound in Hyannis.
This is Casey Sherman describing his Aunt Mary Sullivan.
Not necessarily the most studious of girls, but she tried very hard. She was just a person that had a lot of life and vitality within her.
In the 1962 Barnstable High School yearbook, there's a portrait of Mary. She has short, coiffed hair, and she's wearing a pearl necklace.
Let's see, this is Mary's caption under her picture in the yearbook.
Robin Cruz went to high school with Mary.
Sully is a happy-go-lucky girl with a cheery outlook toward life. Dancing, parties, singing, and church activities bring many happy hours to this bright-eyed girl. I would say no, this does not describe Mary at all.
Really?
Not in the least.
Really? Why?
Well, first, we never called her Sully. Secondly, I'm not sure if she was happy-go-lucky. I think of her as more of a serious type. Dancing. I don't recall her dancing.
Sometimes I would take the same school bus as Mary.
Bill McGlamory was another high school classmate from Cape Cod.
And I would sit with her on the bus if she was sitting by herself, just because I think I kind of felt sorry for her, because I don't know if she had many friends.
Mary wanted to go to Boston to get a prom dress. Her sister Helen asked me if I would be willing to drive up there with her, and I said, absolutely. She drove, and for 2 high school girls from Hyannis that never left the Cape going over the bridge, it was a huge day. It was like crossing the Atlantic Ocean to go over the canal, and we were just like, oh, I can't believe we can do this. But in all of Mary's quietness and timidity, she was very adventuresome. But you had to spend a day like that with her in order to become more familiar with her personality. So we chatted about everything in the whole world, especially her strict religious background that she was not at all happy with.
The last time I saw Mary was Thanksgiving break in 1963. Kennedy had been assassinated the previous Friday. A good friend of mine and I were both home from school, and we were walking down Main Street in the evening, probably around 6 or 7 o'clock. And Mary drove by in her little Nash Metropolitan, which was a little compact car back then. And it was the first time we had seen Mary, well, since high school, which was almost a year and a half. And she was all thrilled. She said she had just gotten a job at Filene's in Boston, and she was in the process of packing up her apartment.
I think she was very anxious to get out from her parents' thumb, and I think that's what drew her off the Cape and to move to Boston.
She wanted to live a bit.
She wanted to have a life of her own.
It's a story we all know, right? A well-mannered, blue-collar kid from a small town, dreaming of independence and a new life in the big city. New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston. These places, with their neon signs and their bustling crowds, attracted young folks like Mary. But the city could also be a lonely place, and increasingly, in the 1960s, a dangerous one. It wasn't long after Mary started her job at Filene's in Boston that one of her co-workers, Pat Delmore, saw her sitting alone in the cafeteria.
And she looked kind of sad. And I said, "Mary, you okay?" She said, "No." She said, "I don't have a place to stay." I said, "Well, I have an apartment." And I said, "Let me talk to Pam." And she said, "Oh, that would be great."
Mary had just moved up to her apartment at 44A Charles Street in Boston's Beacon Hill.
Casey Sherman, Mary Sullivan's nephew.
She moved in with 2 other roommates. They only had 1 bedroom, so Mary had to sleep on the couch. And she was actually moving in her belongings on January 4th, 1964, her first full day in the apartment and her last day on Earth.
It's hard to imagine that an ordinary young woman from Hyannis would become the final victim of one of the most notorious serial killers of the 20th century. But that's what happened to Mary Sullivan. Today, history remembers her as the last name on a list of 13. This is the story of those women, and the killer or killers who brutally murdered them during 2 long years in the early 1960s.
Guys, everybody ready?
Well, if you liked what you heard there, trust me, it gets a lot more interesting. Stranglers, the story of the Boston Strangler case and the killer or killers who may have gotten away with 13 murders. You can subscribe to Stranglers in iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play, however you get your podcasts. You won't want to miss a single episode.
The case can be 10 years old, it can be 20 years old, or it can be 50 years old. If we get the opportunity, we're coming for you.